You do the big Saturday shop, spend $300 or $400, and drive home feeling stocked up for weeks. 4 days later, half of it has already gone bad or been thrown out, and you have no idea where your money went. The Japanese approach a large shop with a meal plan system that doesn't waste a single piece of food or a single dollar across the entire month. Every item from the haul gets turned into a specific portion dinner before it ever goes into the freezer, and one Costco trip becomes 30 days of meals ready for your family. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to run that same system on your own Costco shop. And there is one secret trick that makes food coming out of the freezer taste stronger than it did going in. The work begins with the aromatics, because they are what every single dinner across the next 30 days is going to start with. The garlic gets peeled and dropped into a food processor in one go, blitzed down to a fine mince, then scraped into a sealed freezer bag and pressed completely flat. Once the bag is flat, the back of a knife gets used to score it into a grid of small squares, each one holding roughly a teaspoon of minced garlic. The bag goes into the freezer flat, and the moment it is solid, each square snaps off cleanly along the scored lines the way a bar of chocolate does. The ginger gets peeled and processed the same way. The green onion gets sliced thin and pressed flat, and the fresh chili from the Shishito peppers gets minced and flattened into its own bag. The 4 aromatics together are known as Yakumi in Japanese, and they are the base layer of almost every dish that follows. Freezing them into snap-off squares on shop day means the first 30 seconds of any recipe are already done before anyone even walks into the kitchen for dinner. The minced garlic sold in a jar at the supermarket is not a substitute for this, by the way. It is stabilized with citric acid and preservatives that flatten the flavor down to almost nothing recognizable. Frozen fresh garlic still tastes like garlic. It just tastes like garlic in a form that does not require peeling and mincing at 6:30 on a Tuesday when energy for cooking is already running low. A quick compound butter also gets made at this station using softened butter blitzed with a handful of the garlic squares, a pinch of salt, and a scatter of dehydrated parsley for color. The mixture gets rolled into a log in a piece of parchment, twisted at both ends, and frozen ready for slices to be cut and dropped onto hot bread or into a hot pan whenever a rich, savory finish is needed. One slice on top of a piece of grilled salmon, one slice melted into a bowl of rice, one slice on a hot piece of toast under the broiler, and dinner has already picked up a layer of richness for almost no work. The extra shishito peppers that did not go into the aromatic bag become a jar of soy pickles instead, which is a Japanese-style tsukemono. Equal parts soy sauce, rice vinegar, and sugar get simmered together in a small pan until the sugar dissolves, then poured over the chopped peppers waiting in a heat-proof glass jar. The jar sits on the counter to cool, then goes into the fridge, where it holds for a month and only improves with time. It becomes the sharp, bright counterpoint spooned over rich, fatty grilled meats later in the month, sliced onto a bowl of hot rice for a quick lunch, or eaten straight out of the jar as a snack with a cold beer. The salted Pollock roe is next, and it is one of the most versatile things in the whole haul. Half of the jar gets wrapped in parchment paper in small portions and frozen flat, ready to thaw quickly and be sliced over hot rice with a drizzle of sesame oil for a classic Japanese breakfast that hits every note of salt and umami in a single bite. The other half becomes Mentaiko mayonnaise, which is equal parts Pollock roe and mayonnaise blitzed together in a food processor until smooth, then spooned into a silicone ice cube tray and frozen into individual cubes. Any thin skin on the roe can be picked out with chopsticks before blending if it bothers the cook, but leaving it in will not hurt anything. Once frozen, the Mentaiko cubes get popped out of the tray and stored in a small container together, ready to be pulled out one at a time. Stirred through hot pasta with a splash of the cooking water and a generous crack of black pepper, one cube becomes Mentaiko pasta, which is a beloved Japanese cafe dish that takes exactly 10 minutes to make from freezer to plate. Stirred into cooked rice with a knob of butter, one cube becomes Mentaiko fried rice. Spooned over grilled fish, one cube becomes a sauce that turns a plain fillet into something restaurant-worthy in a single motion. That kind of small trick is exactly the thinking that keeps a Japanese kitchen running for less. There are hundreds more habits like it, and I have pulled every single one of them into my book called The Complete Japanese Kitchen Handbook. It shows how to cut hundreds of dollars off the grocery bill every month, keep the pantry from ever going to waste, and turn the cheapest ingredients on the shelf into meals the family will actually love. The book is over at the frugaljapan.shop. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below for instant access. Now, the other use for the Mentaiko mayo is what happens next with the milk bread. The Japanese loaf that Costco sells, called Shokupan, is genuinely one of the best things in the entire warehouse. It is dense and soft and slightly sweet, and it makes everything built on top of it taste better. 2 slices at a time get a thin spread of the Mentaiko mayo across the top, a generous handful of shredded Monterey Jack cheese piled on top of that, and then go straight into the freezer on a lined tray in a single layer. Once they are frozen through, they stack easily and take up almost no space at all in the freezer. A slice pulled straight from the freezer into a hot oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes becomes Mentaiko cheese toast, which is the kind of breakfast that turns a Monday morning into something worth getting out of bed for. The result on the plate is remarkable. The bottom of the bread crisps hard against the tray. The cheese melts into a golden crust with brown spots across the surface. The Mentaiko mayo underneath goes slightly bubbly and warm, and the whole thing pulls apart with strings of melted cheese stretching between the slice and the plate. 2 slices are almost too much for one person to finish alone, which is exactly the problem you want to have. The rest of the milk bread gets treated the way Japanese cafes prepare their famous Shokupan French toast. Eggs, milk, a splash of soy sauce, and maple syrup all get whisked together in a flat tray, and the thick milk bread slices get soaked for 5 minutes on each side until they are fully saturated and heavy with custard. The soy sauce is the trick that turns this from ordinary French toast into something that tastes like it came out of a Tokyo neighborhood cafe, because the umami from the soy pushes the caramelization further and deeper than sugar alone ever could. The soaked slices get lifted carefully onto a parchment-lined container, with more parchment between each slice so they do not stick together, and the whole container goes into the freezer overnight. On a slow Sunday morning, a single slice goes straight from the freezer into a hot pan with a knob of butter, cooked over medium-low heat so it thaws through evenly without the outside burning. Flipped when the underside is deep, golden brown, cooked for another few minutes on the second side, then plated with a strip of the frozen bacon that has been crisped in a separate pan, and a generous pour of maple syrup over the top. The interior stays soft and custardy while the outside crisps into a shell that holds it all together. If there are kids in the house, bagel pizzas assembled with a spoonful of the marinara and frozen on the same tray are worth the extra 5 minutes. But the Shokupan French toast is the crown of the bread station. The vegetables come next, and each one gets a small trick to make it last through the month. The eggplants get wrapped in a sheet of old newspaper, which controls the moisture around them and makes them last twice as long in the crisper drawer of the fridge than they would sitting exposed. The leafy greens get washed thoroughly under cold water and dried in a salad spinner, then packed into a container lined with a slightly damp kitchen cloth on the bottom, which holds just enough humidity to keep them crisp for a full week without wilting. Some of the leaves get kept whole for lettuce wraps to serve alongside grilled meats later in the month, and the rest get chopped for quick side salads on days when a lighter plate is needed. The green cabbage gets split into 2 halves for 2 very different uses. One half gets thinly sliced on a mandolin for a Japanese-style cabbage salad served alongside grilled meats or a bowl of pork tonkatsu when the occasion calls for one. The other half gets shredded into small chunks and set aside for what comes next, which is one of the most useful freezer preps in the entire month. The 4-pack of bacon gets split 4 ways before anything else happens to it. 1 pack stays whole in the fridge for the coming weekend's breakfast rotation. The other 3 packs get separated strip by strip and laid out on a wire rack in the freezer in a single layer, so each strip freezes individually rather than as one solid brick that has to be pried apart. Once they are frozen through, all the strips go into a single large freezer bag together, and any single strip can be pulled out at any time without having to thaw the whole pack. Frozen bacon strips also go directly from freezer to cold pan without any need to thaw first, which means bacon becomes something that can be added to a breakfast in about 4 minutes flat. A second portion of bacon gets chopped into small chunks and wrapped in parchment in small bundles, ready for stir fries, fried rice, pasta sauces, and the next station in the prep, which is the okonomiyaki mix. The pre-mixed okonomiyaki batter turns the shredded cabbage and the bacon chunks into a lunch that is ready to cook in under 10 minutes for the entire month. Each single serve container gets 2 cups of shredded cabbage, a quarter cup of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon of salt, a good crack of black pepper, 1 square of frozen ginger, and a quarter cup of the chopped bacon. The containers get sealed and frozen exactly as they are, and the whole month has lunch ready inside the freezer without any further work required. The reason this particular mix works so beautifully after freezing is the same reason it might sound counterintuitive at first. Freezing shredded cabbage breaks down its cell walls and releases the moisture that would otherwise need to be drawn out by 15 minutes of salting when the cabbage was still fresh. The cabbage that thaws in the pan is already the perfect texture for the pancake to hold together and cook evenly on both sides. To cook it, the frozen container gets an egg cracked directly into it, a splash of water, and a good shake to combine everything into a rough batter, then poured into a hot oiled pan and spread evenly with the back of a spoon. Once the top looks set and the edges have started to pull away from the sides of the pan, a confident flip gives the pancake a golden crisp underside, and it gets cooked on the second side for another 2 or 3 minutes until the whole thing feels firm to the touch. The plate goes together with a drizzle of okonomiyaki sauce across the top, a lighter drizzle of Japanese mayonnaise crossing the sauce in a lattice pattern, and a scatter of parsley or dried seaweed flakes for color. 2 dishes total for the whole lunch, no cutting board involved anywhere, and about 8 minutes from freezer to plate. This becomes the default weekday lunch across the month. The salmon is the most delicate part of the whole haul, and it needs the most careful treatment of everything on the counter. The side gets a cure of 3 tablespoons of salt and 2 tablespoons of sugar rubbed evenly over every surface, then sits uncovered on a rack over a tray in the fridge for 1 full hour. The cure draws out excess moisture through osmosis, and the salmon that comes off the rack an hour later is noticeably firmer, cleaner tasting, and easier to slice than it went in. It gets rinsed under cold running water, patted completely dry with paper towels, and cut into meal-sized portions. Now, the honest part about home sushi grade preparation, because there is a lot of misinformation floating around about this. The FDA standard for killing parasites in raw fish is negative 20 degrees Celsius for 7 full days, and most home freezers do not reliably hold that temperature. Farmed Atlantic salmon, which is what most Costco warehouses stock, is raised on parasite-free feed and carries a parasite risk approximately 500 times lower than wild salmon does. That is why farmed salmon is often served raw in restaurants without any freezing step at all, and it is why the cured salmon from a Costco farmed side can safely be sliced and eaten raw within a day or 2 of curing, kept in the coldest part of the fridge in the meantime. 1 portion goes into the fridge for a salmon crudo the following day, sliced thin against the grain and laid flat on a chilled plate. A spoonful of the soy-pickled peppers with a little of their brine goes over the top, followed by a slow drizzle of olive oil that pools around the fish and a few grains of flaky salt for texture. It comes together in about 4 minutes total, and it tastes like a course from a much more expensive restaurant than the one it was made in. Another portion gets cubed into bite-sized pieces and mixed in a bowl with 1 thawed cube of the Mentaiko mayo, a splash of chili oil, a small pinch of the frozen green onion, and a drop of sesame oil. The mixture gets spooned generously over a bowl of hot rice, and the whole plate becomes a Japanese-style poke bowl that costs a fraction of what the same dish would cost at a lunch counter. The rice underneath warms the salmon slightly from below, the Mentaiko mayo coats every piece in a rich, savory glaze, and the chili oil cuts through the richness with a slow warmth that builds across the whole bowl. A 3rd portion gets coated in shio-koji, the fermented rice paste that Japanese cooks have used for centuries as a natural tenderizer and flavor builder. The paste gets rubbed over both sides of the fillet in a generous layer, and the fillet gets wrapped flat in parchment and frozen. When the day comes to eat it, the fillet thaws overnight in the fridge, gets scraped clean of most of the paste, and lands skin side down in a hot pan with a little oil until the skin crisps golden and the flesh flakes gently apart when tested with the tip of a knife. Served over rice with a slice of the compound butter melting on top and a spoonful of the soy-pickled peppers on the side, It becomes a 15-minute weeknight dinner that tastes like it took hours. The Asian pears are next, and they are the quiet secret behind the best Japanese meat marinades. Pears contain natural enzymes called proteases that break down muscle fiber, which is why they are used across both Korean and Japanese cooking as a tenderizing base for beef and pork marinades. 2 of the pears get set aside for eating fresh, wrapped loosely in a breathable bag and stored in the coldest part of the fridge, and the rest get peeled and chunked into the blender along with an equal amount of roughly chopped onion and a splash of water to help the blades catch. Once smooth, the pear and onion puree gets poured into small freezer containers and stored ready to become the base of any meat marinade needed across the entire month. The thinly sliced short rib gets marinated straight away using a portion of the pear puree blended with soy sauce, sugar, mirin, black pepper, sesame oil, and squares of frozen garlic and ginger from the Aromatics station. This particular mixture is the classic Japanese Sukiyaki base, and the sliced beef sits in the marinade for a full day in the fridge before being portioned into flat freezer bags for 2 people at a time. On the day of eating, the bag thaws overnight in the fridge, and the contents get emptied into a shallow earthenware pot at the table along with cubed tofu, sliced leek, wedges of onion, and a handful of the frozen mushrooms if any happen to be in the freezer. A splash of dashi and a spoonful more of the sukiyaki base loosens the whole pot into a bubbling broth, and each person picks pieces of beef and vegetable out of the pot with chopsticks, dipping them in a small bowl of raw egg on the way to the mouth if they want the full traditional experience. The rest of the short rib goes into a second lighter marinade, closer to a Gyudon base, made with dashi, soy sauce, mirin, and a little sugar. Portioned flat into freezer bags along with sliced onion, the meat thaws overnight and simmers together in a small pan for about 10 minutes until the onions are soft and the beef is just cooked through. Spooned over a bowl of hot rice with a scattering of the frozen green onion on top and a soft poached egg cracked in the middle. It becomes a 15-minute weeknight beef bowl that rivals any lunch counter in Tokyo. 12 dinners of beef sit in the freezer between the 2 preparations, ready to thaw overnight and cook in the time it takes to make a bowl of rice on the side. The pork shoulder is the biggest single piece of meat in the haul, and it becomes the widest range of finished meals across the month. The whole shoulder goes into the freezer for 1 hour first, which firms it up just enough to make clean, thin slicing possible with a sharp knife. Once sliced thin against the grain, the pork gets split into 3 separate batches for 3 separate preparations. The first batch gets a Shōgayaki marinade made from soy sauce, mirin, sake, sugar, and a heavy dose of grated ginger from the frozen squares. The slices get tossed thoroughly in the marinade until every piece is coated, then portioned into flat freezer bags for 2 people at a time. Cooking it takes about 8 minutes from a fully thawed state. The slices go into a hot pan with a little neutral oil, cooked in a single layer until the edges caramelize, then flipped once and finished with a splash, more of the marinade poured directly into the pan to reduce down to a glossy glaze. Served over rice with a mound of the thinly sliced fresh cabbage on the side, dressed with a squeeze of lemon and a pinch of salt. It becomes a classic Japanese diner dinner that anyone who has spent time in Tokyo will recognize immediately. The second batch gets a Misozuke treatment, which is a coating of white miso mixed with a little sake and sugar until it forms a soft paste, spread over both sides of each slice, wrapped tightly in a flat bag, and frozen ready for the grill later in the month. The miso pulls moisture out of the pork and pushes salt and savoriness back in over the days the meat sits in the freezer and then thaws slowly in the fridge. When the day comes to cook it, the slices get scraped, mostly clean of the paste, laid onto a hot grill pan or under a broiler for about 3 minutes per side until the exterior blackens in spots and the interior stays juicy, and served alongside a bowl of white rice, a mound of pickled peppers from the jar, and a small bowl of Tonjiru, the hearty pork and miso soup that's coming up next. The plate that comes together is the kind of dinner served in an old-style Japanese home for a birthday or a homecoming. The third batch of pork gets cubed rather than sliced, and it goes into the Tonjiru prep, which is Japan's hearty pork and miso soup and one of the most soul-warming things ever put into a bowl. Each single-serve container gets cubed pork, cubed daikon or carrot, sliced leek, cubed silken tofu, 1 square of frozen ginger, and a heaped spoonful of white miso paste already resting in the corner of the container. The containers get sealed and frozen, and the whole month has a hot soup ready to build on any given evening. To cook it, the container gets emptied into a small earthenware pot. Just enough water is added to cover the ingredients by an inch, and the pot simmers on low heat for about 20 minutes until the daikon is tender and the whole broth has taken on the color of the miso and the fat from the pork. Ladled into a bowl and served alongside a piece of grilled fish, a bowl of white rice, and a small dish of pickles, it becomes a full traditional Japanese dinner in about 30 minutes of mostly hands-off time. The soup itself is deeply savory, gently rich from the pork fat, and slightly sweet from the daikon, and it is the kind of thing that makes a cold evening feel warmer than it has any right to. The Kirkland marinara jar rarely gets finished in one go, and the trick is never to let the last third of it end up neglected at the back of the fridge. Whatever is left after the first use goes straight into a silicone ice cube tray and gets frozen into individual sauce cubes, popped out of the tray once solid, and stored together in a small container ready to be pulled out 1 or 2 at a time. 3 or 4 cubes dropped into a hot pan with a splash of white wine to deglaze. A scatter of the frozen bacon chunks that have been crisped in the pan first for a base of savory fat, and a pinch of chili flakes for warmth becomes the base for a quick Japanese-Italian pasta dinner. The sauce simmers for a few minutes until the cubes have fully melted and reduced into something glossy and thick. Then cooked spaghetti gets tossed directly into the pan with a splash of pasta water to loosen the whole thing into a proper emulsion. A generous shower of grated cheese and a crack of black pepper finish the plate. 20 minutes of work total from freezer to plate, and no takeout order needed. That leaves the watermelon, which is the crown of a Japanese summer table and the last station of the haul. Choosing a good one at the warehouse comes down to one strange but reliable trick, which is to look for the smallest belly button on the bottom of the fruit, because the smallest ones tend to have the sweetest and reddest flesh inside. It is a piece of grandmother wisdom that has no explanation attached to it, but has held up over generations of watermelon buyers. Slicing the watermelon starts with taking the top and the bottom flat with a bread knife so it sits stably on the cutting board without rolling, then splitting the whole fruit in half through the middle and shaving down the sides in long strokes to leave 2 red domes with no skin. The domes get cut into neat cubes about 1 inch across and packed carefully into containers so they sit tightly together without wasting any of the space. The odd pieces from the corners and the ends that will not fit into the cube shape go into the blender with a squeeze of lemon and get blitzed into juice, strained through a fine sieve to catch the seeds and pulp, and bottled to sit in the fridge as a summer drink that tastes like it is being poured straight from the fruit itself. A cold glass of watermelon juice first thing in the morning before any water passes, the lips feels almost illegally good and quenches a thirst deeper than anything else in the fridge. Japanese cooks call this way of eating shun, which means eating each thing at the precise moment of the year when it is at its best and its cheapest, and preserving the peak of that moment for later use. Summer watermelon eaten in the middle of winter tastes exactly like the July it was frozen in, and the juice pulled from the freezer on a cold January evening becomes a small-time capsule of a warmer season. The counter is now completely empty. The freezer holds roughly 30 days of specific named dinners, breakfasts, and lunches, all built out of the same one shopping trip. Mentaiko cheese toast and Shokupan French toast for slow weekend mornings. Okonomiyaki for weekday lunches, 1 container at a time, ready in 10 minutes. Shōgayaki, Misozuke pork, and Tonjiru covering the pork dinners across the month. Sukiyaki nights and quick Gyudon bowls handling the beef rotation. Salmon crudo, salmon poke, and shio-koji grilled salmon rotating through the fish plates. Yakumi squares of garlic, ginger, green onion, and chili waiting to season anything at all. A jar of soy-pickled peppers ready to lift any rich plate. Marinara cubes for a Japanese-Italian pasta night when nothing else appeals. A compound butter log ready to melt onto anything hot. And a summer watermelon quietly sitting in the fridge with juice already bottled next to it. There is a Japanese word that sits underneath all of this, and the word is matanai. It does not simply mean do not be wasteful, and it is not a scolding from a parent. It runs deeper than that. It is the genuine regret felt when something good never got the chance to become what it could have been. The sense that a thing had a real purpose and was never once allowed to fulfill it. It treats the wasted potential itself as the loss, rather than just the money that went along with it. When someone throws away a frozen bag they never opened, Matanai is the feeling of the meal it was supposed to become, the money it represented, and the care of everyone who grew it and packed it and drove it all the way to the local Costco, all going into the trash together in one single motion of the hand. That heavier feeling is probably the real reason people freeze things in the first place rather than throw them out, honestly. Because putting something in the freezer feels like postponing the loss, even though it usually just delays it by 6 months. That is the whole method. One Costco trip, broken down in a single afternoon, becomes 30 days of dinners that are already portioned, already seasoned, and already assigned to a specific night. Cooking on a weeknight stops being a project and becomes assembly. 12 minutes with a hot pan, a bag from the freezer, and a bowl of rice, and a real Japanese dinner is on the table. Try it on the next Costco run. Pick 5 ingredients from this video, break them down the same afternoon they come home, and see what the next month of dinners actually feels like. Now thanks a lot for watching, hit subscribe, and click the video appearing on your screen right now for more. I'll see you in the next one.